Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Flashback Comics and Games in Woodbridge, Virginia. I'm Troy David Phillips, and this is another installment of Troy's Spotlight. Today, I am hyper excited about AntMan. I just went and saw the Marvel cinematic film, AntMan, with Paul Rudd as Scott Lang, and I am going to give you some of the background history to the first two AntMan characters, to the original Ant-Man, Henry Pym, and to Scott Lang, his very worthy successor. First, Tales to Astonish number 27, the first appearance of Hank Pym as the man in the anthill. This is a story about Hank, a scientist who discovers a process to shrink himself. He falls into an anthill and he has a series of hair-raising adventures. Tales to Astonish at the time was very much an anthology of science fiction and horror stories, and the story of a man trapped at ant size in the anthill was very much in the tone and tenor at the time. However, Stan Lee thought he might have a hit on his hands, and so he picked the character back up, gave him a costume, and in Tales to Astonish number 35, we were introduced not just to Hank Pym. Hank Pym is now the Ant-Man, not just man in the anthill. Hank would pick up a partner in Janet Van Dyne, and that would be Tales to Astonish number 44, the creature from Cosmos, and that would give us his partner in crime fighting, the Wasp. Hank and Janet would go on to be co-founders in the Avengers, along with Thor, the Hulk, and Iron Man. Much later, Avengers number 59 and 60, Hank Pym would undergo a brief period of insanity, believing that he was a different person who kills Henry Pym. He introduces us to the Yellow Jacket identity. Similar power set in that he can shrink, still command and control insects. His power set is greatly expanded at the time, and he and the Wasp continue on as successful Avengers. We have seen Hank Pym go through some fairly dark times. There was definitely a period where he disgraced himself. He was voted out of the Avengers. Jumping backwards a little bit, I'm going to talk a bit about Scott Lang now. Paul Rudd plays the character, and he does a wonderful job of covering Scott Lang, who is a single father, a man who turned to burglary when his work as an electrical engineer was not supporting his family. He did some prison time. His wife divorced him, and he tried, however, to be a good dad. He tried to stay in Cassie, his daughter's life, and he eventually found work with Stark Enterprises. We were introduced to Scott Lang as a Stark employee, and that was in Avengers 181. In Marvel Premiere number 47 and number 48, the second half of the story, we saw that Scott, to assist his daughter, who was undergoing a life-threatening illness at the time, attempted to contact a woman named Dr. Erica Sondheim. This brought him into yet another breaking in. He broke in this time to Cross Technological Enterprises, had a series of adventures, and had stolen the Ant-Man gear from Henry Pym. Henry Pym observed Scott, watched what he did, and at the conclusion of the adventure, allowed Scott to keep the Ant-Man gear, allowed him to keep the costume, and allowed him to build on the identity, and Scott became the new Ant-Man. And these days, in the pages of Ant-Man, Scott does have his own regular series. He has started his own electronic security firm, and he has extended that redemption, that second chances, to some other former villains, and we're given a very interesting ensemble of characters, beginning first with the Grizzly, of all people, former Spider-Man villain. That's a lot of history there. For a character so very small, there's so very much to talk about. Come into Flashback Comics, and I will talk happily with you about Henry Pym, about Scott Lang, and maybe even we'll talk a little bit about the irredeemable Ant-Man Eric O'Grady. Until next time, if you haven't seen this film, I strenuously recommend it. It's a fantastic addition to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let's move on with Phase 3, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. Flashback Comics and Games, check out the Troy David spotlights that appear here. Also, check out the new comic release Wednesday, our top 5 picks. Me and my co-host Kevin Goswan from comicsonline.com give you our top 5 picks for each week. And also check out the Flashback Comics and Games website. Be sure to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter.